Hello, this is Steven Hour, and yes, we're back with a top 10 video. Today, we'll be doing my top 10 favorite Bond moments. Now, I understand this is purely subjective and personal opinion based. I'll be essentially going through the entire history of the Bond series and moments that stood out to me, whether it's plot point or just iconic moments that, for me, are just some of my favorite of this film franchise. Now, with that out of the way, let's get straight into the video with an honorable mention. The honorable mention goes to Bond interrogating General Pushkin. Now, Timothy Dalton gets a bit of a mixed feeling amongst the fandom. Some really love him, and some feel not so much. He's kind of and in my opinion, he's the most underrated Bond. He had the shortest tenure of only 2 films, but I feel like his 2 films really gave us some of the most darkest interpretations of Bond way before the Daniel Craig era ever really began. And for me, him interrogating Pushkin in his first film, The Living Daylights, is for me one of my favorite moments. It really just shows how impressive Timothy Dalton's acting range is, and really just shows just how much of a departure he was to his predecessors. Now, Bond has done interrogations before, but I think it hasn't been as dark, or even as more professional and even more ruthless. For me, he's even far more ruthless than Craig's probably Bond ever would be. For me, he is truly the first darkest Bond, but I give him an honorable mention because, again, he has the shortest tenure, and really, if you really think about it in hindsight, his, well, because he has the shortest tenure with only 2 films, you can't really say he has so much iconic moments, but this is definitely one, and I give it an honorable mention because of that. With that out of the way, let's get into the actual list. With that, number 10, Bond. James Bond. Probably the most iconic line ever in cinema. Every actor who has come on the role have to pronounce that line, and many are so great. And this is just, for me, all of it. Every time Bond has had to say that. But for me, only 2 really stand out. The second one, the first one, which is the one that really takes the spot on the list, is Sean Connery saying Bond, James Bond. The first time he said it, and automatically kicked it off. I like how it was a build-up. We never got to see his face, but then when they asked his name, he just went Bond, James Bond, in Dr. No. That's the one that really takes the list. I was I was very tempted to have Daniel Craig when he said James Bond, Bond, James Bond in Casino Royale, but this is, for me, just the iconic moment that really set up not just the film series, but cinema in general. How the way Connery just says the name with such, sophistication, suave, and overall coolness takes the 10th spot for me, and I think that is, for me, well deserved. Number 9, the tank chase. Now, Bond has got himself into a lot of chases over the series, and for me, the tank chase in GoldenEye is one of my favorites. Now, Pierce Brosnan's Bond, again, he did Bond from 1995 all the way to 2002, but I think this tank chase is arguably one of my favorite chases of his entire tenure, when essentially a rogue Russian general kidnaps the Bond girl of the film and drives away. Bond has to chase him, so he ends up chasing him in a tank in, I believe, somewhere in Russia, and it's just fun. It can be slightly considered a little bit over the top, but for some reason the film managed to make it so realistic. And just Pierce, how he's like driving it, you can really tell that he's just really just in the motion of it. I love every minute of it. The destruction the tank causes, it really feels like this big action set piece that honestly just makes the film GoldenEye work so well for many people, and even me. This is one of my favorite standout moments, and just the work of the editing and even the music and just the overall atmosphere that the scene has, for me, makes this one of my favorites. Number 8. Here we're going to get something to a bit dark. Felix Leiter getting his leg bitten off. Felix Leiter is a very unique character in the Bond series. While most of and is part of those recurring characters that appear in every Bond film, with like M, Moneypenny, and Q. But what makes Felix so different is it's always constant musical chairs with this guy. Nearly every film, like the next film, it's a completely different actor. Rarely did an actor stay on to continue the role, with an exception of the actor you see in this photo, who actually first did the role way back in Live and Let Die in '73, but would reprise the role in 1989's License to Kill, arguably the darkest film of the franchise. This just really showed just how far the series makers wanted to go in making Bond darker and grittier, and I stand by. I felt they succeeded in that. This is really one of the darkest things, and it's actually taken from an Ian Fleming short story, not short story, the actual novel of Live and Let Die, where Felix actually got his leg bitten off. And I just like how it's a bit, they're adapting a bit of the book, bit of Felix, but it makes sense to have this happen to a beloved character, even though he's kind of, mumble jumbo in the whole actor, reprising the role thing. And this is just really gruesome to happen to one of our favorite recurring characters. And honestly, it just really shows that this is going in a dark direction. Now, it takes the spot because it is so dark, and because it stands out to me. That's why it takes the 8th spot. It beats the GoldenEye tank chase, because honestly, that one's more lighthearted, but this one was really heading into more the source material of Bond, and I appreciate it for it so much. Number 7. The submarine car and the Aston Martin DB5 return. I had to include the Bond cars on this list. Now, the submarine car is all said. The Lotus Esprit was Roger Moore's Bond car, and he kind of really drove it for really 2 films. But in the first one that he drove it in, The Spy Who Loved Me, is a fan favorite to many. It looks like just a car that he's just trying to outchase a helicopter, but when it dives into the water and turns into a submarine, really, for me, is actually very impressive for the time and how they could do that with limited CGI, more practical effects. I really dig it. And yeah, it's a bit over the top, but it fits the Roger Moore era so well, and I loved every minute of it. And I include when it turned into a submarine. Now, the Aston Martin had to have a place on this list. Now, I was tempted to maybe do its first appearance in Goldfinger, but one scene that really stood out to me more than that was its long-awaited return in Skyfall, and it celebrating that 50th anniversary feel. It really felt great for Bond to be back behind the wheel. Now, technically, Daniel Craig had driven this particular Aston Martin in Casino Royale, but I just loved its return in GoldenEye. For me, not GoldenEye, Skyfall really worked for me. And I take that. I had to include the cars on this list, and I decided to put them both on the 7th spot because they are such iconic cars in the Bond series, so they take the 7th spot. Number 6. M's death. Now, M is one of the most infamous Bond reoccurring characters, played by Bernard Lee throughout most of the classic era, before being taken over by Brown in Roger Moore's last Bond films, and throughout the very short-lived Timothy Dalton run. But then in the 90s, Judi Dench took on the role, and has become an absolute fan favorite of the character. And she was there throughout the whole Pierce Brosnan age, and came back to the Daniel Craig reboot age. Her departure, to put it mildly, in Skyfall, was an absolute shocker for me, and it's still to this day, when I go to the theatre, or the movies, when I ever get the chance to, just remembering that scene really shook me, just how the series was really giving her, essentially, her character getting departed in such a very brutal way, getting killed. Now, she dies from a flesh wound, but in many ways, this is a painful for Bond, because he always viewed Em as a mother figure. It's painful for us, because we, the Bond fans, remember her way back, when she first took on the role in '95, but in many ways, it's where the villain actually won. And that rarely happens in a Bond series, for the villain to win. That's just something for me completely unheard of, and it really shook me, and I think a lot of fans, when we saw this in the theater. So that takes number 6. Taking the 5th spot is the ski jump. Bond and action scenes go together like peanut butter and jelly, and every film that had to up the ante. One of the most iconic, stunts done in the entire series was the ski jump in The Spy Who Loved Me. Just how it's done. Bond is being chased. He's going down a hill, but it's coming to a cliff, and he skis off. We think, oh, is he gonna die? He then opens up a parachute, which happens to have the Union Jack, and then the theme song plays. A great opening to the film, and proves that Bond is still going strong. I love how most of the stunts in the early Bond films were done with practical effects and stunt work, not with the constant CGI used in more modern films. I get for some, yes, CGI needs to be used, but I wouldn't mind if the films could go back to basics, to more practical and stunt work effects in films. I would just love that so much. Again, kind of different with sci-fi, you need CGI to really work for it, I get that, but I wouldn't mind. And this is just a breathtaking stunt, and the team behind it really deserve a round of applause and a pat on the back for pulling this off back in the late 70s. This was just an outstanding and breathtaking stunt ever seen in cinema, and even to this day, it is, and even in Bond stunt work, this is one of the most iconic jumps in the series' history. Number 4. Blofelds Reveal. Blofeld is the quintessential James Bond villain and Bond's arch nemesis, but interesting, for a lot of the film's run in the 60s, he was always hidden behind the camera. Not even Bond ever really properly saw him. He may have heard his voice, but never really met Blofeld. He ran the criminal organization known as Spectre, famous for petting the White Cat, which has become a spoof and parody to many, such as the Austin Powers franchise. He ran the criminal organization essentially for his own devious ways. But in You Only Live Twice, Blofeld had his final reveal. A last-minute call in to have Donald Pleasance play the role, and given a scar to make him look more menacing, he had this infamous reveal after films of waiting. He's revealed. And I just love how he just looks into the camera. There's something about those eyes. Normal to some people, but there's something that is just creepy. In fact, that's what I've liked about Donald Pleasance's Blofeld. If you could describe his Blofeld entirely, it is, well, creepy. And that is, in my opinion, a very good description of this particular incarnation. He is creepy. There's something just about that stare. And how the way he speaks with no emotion. Just coldness. And that reveal, that shot. Absolutely marvelously done by everyone involved. And especially by the performance of Donald Pleasance, who went down in history as one of the most iconic cinema villains probably ever, not just in the Bond series, but cinema history in general. Absolutely. And to this day remains one of my most famous moments of Blofeld. Well, maybe another infamous Blofeld moment might have popped on this list that he had a part in. I wonder if that's the next one. Anyway, number 3. The torture scene. Casino Royale really brought Bond back essentially from the disaster that many people felt Die Another Day was. Brought Bond back to basics and back to the roots of the character from the novel. And this is one of the prime examples to why that film is so loved. When Bond is captured by the villain's Le Chiffre, he is stripped naked, tied to a chair, and is brutally tortured by essentially having his balls whacked by this rope. And essentially, he's being tortured to give up information. It is a brutal scene. Daniel Craig pulls it off immensely. And just how it all works is fantastic. It is brutal. The almost claustrophobic feel of the environment they're in. And Bond knowing that Bond accepting that his time is up. Rarely in the Bond series has Bond ever accepted that, that his time is up, that he's, reached the end of the rope, and he's willing to die just so that way Le Chiffre will not win. Now he will be forced to go and beg for protection by MI6. That is a really brutal scene, and Bond is willing to accept death and the torture. It's just a scene that stood out. Even when I first saw this was one of the many reasons I got into the series, because of how brutal it was. Again, just as the theme song said to the film, you are, how you are special but instantly replaceable, and the house will betray you. Just those lines really sum up Bond as a really blunt instrument of the British government. Really, really there. Just a scene that is hard to look away from, but part of you wants to. It really is. Number 2. Traceys Death. Probably one of the most iconic deaths of the series, not by Bond's hand. On Her Majesty's is definitely a different type of Bond film, with George Lazenby doing his one and only Bond film. And in this film is different from many others. It's not just another Bond go up against Blofeld, but it is also where Bond where the first ever Bond girl becomes the first proper Bond bride. Tracy, portrayed by the late great Diana Rigg, is one of the most iconic Bond girls and is my favourite Bond girl of all time. What makes this film stand out is just her death kind of comes out of nowhere. When Bond is and Tracy are about to drive off and live a happy life, they stop by the side of the road to pick flowers. And down comes Blofeld and his assistant, Uma Bunt, and she fires a machine gun at the car. Bond ducks and sees that, it was Blofeld, quickly hops into the car, only to turn around in heartbreak and horror that the bullet missed him but got Tracy. And George Lazenby's acting here, how he's breaking down in denial of her death. And the final line, "We have all the time in the world," brings me to tears every time. Well, mostly every time now. I think I've kind of grown up. No, I haven't. No, just kidding. But the death here is just so shocking, and it works for this film, and makes this film just so different in general. Very few times, up until the Craig era, I would say the Bond films, with the exception of this one, always had a different ending. Well, stick to the same ending. But this was the first time in the series where the film, didn't have Bond shagging the girl at the end of the film, but Bond grieving for the death of his wife, and just he's about to accept having a life with her. It's truly a heartbreaking scene, and George Lazenby pulls it off. I really wish he could have come back for a second film, not only because this is one of the most powerful moments, but for him to finally, at least get a proper revenge story for the death of Tracy, which I think the film series had not done justly, and really deserves to at least do that right. That's just my opinion. Now, but with number 2, there must be a number 1. So, at the number 1 spot, greatest Bond moment goes to Fort Knox Assault. I put this above one of the most infamous scenes in the series. Why? Because of the stunning just layout of this place. It is fantastic. I'd say this is the best Bond moment because it shows what the Bond films are. An absolute escapism with great set pieces, action scenes. Hell, Goldfinger is the gold standard for a Bond film. You could fit nearly everything that happened in this film just with this in this top 10 alone. But I knew I had to pick one thing from this film. But only one thing goes for me. The Fort Knox Assault. How it is just the ticking time bomb. Bond facing Oddjob, trying to take him down, get closer to the bomb, while Goldfinger's men are fighting all these army guys. It is just so epic. Maybe, if you really think about it, this should really be the number 2, and number 2 should really be the number 1. But, come on. This fight scene is epic. It is my favorite Bond moment. It beats everything, and deservedly so. It is really one of the greatest action set pieces of the Bond franchise, and you could argue that many might have topped it, and that is true. But, for me, this is just one of the finest action set pieces within the Bond series, and it is my number 1. There we have it. Those were my top 10 Bond moments. Do you agree with this list? What would you have put in number 1? Did I miss something on the list? Please, write down your opinions in the comments. Actually, I'd like to list your own top 10 Bond moments. Please write it down in the comments below. And until then, this has been the Steven Hour, and ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.